Sigma has released a new wide-angle lens for APS-C crop sensor cameras. This lens has a fixed focal length of 16 millimeters and a maximum aperture of f1.4. This lens is actually one of 3 new lenses for the EF-M mount system, and those additional lenses include 30 millimeters and 56 millimeters. Now, I'm very excited and curious to see how well this lens performs, because for the past year, I have been shooting a lot of travel vlog video content, and the camera that I've been using for all of that content has been this one. This is, of course, the Canon M50. This is a crop sensor mirrorless camera. It's probably one of the more popular vlogging cameras out there, and with good reason, because it has a fully articulating screen on the back so that you can see yourself when you're filming. 1080 video on this looks great. The 4K mode has a pretty severe crop, but I don't shoot in 4K on this camera, so it doesn't really affect me. It also has exceptional autofocus thanks to its dual pixel autofocus mode when shooting in 1080. And the lens that I've been using pretty much 100% of the time with the M50 has been this one. This is a Canon EF-M lens that has a variable focal length of 11 to 22 millimeters and a maximum aperture ranging between f4 and f5.6, depending on which focal length you are shooting with. So today I'm going to review this new Sigma wide-angle 16mm lens on the Canon M50, and I'm also going to compare and contrast this lens against the Canon EF-M 11 to 22. All right, let's start by talking about the physical properties of these lenses. The Sigma lens is definitely larger than the 11 to 22. I'd guesstimate it to be about 1.25 inches taller and probably about 1/2 inch wider in diameter. As for weight, the Sigma lens weighs in at 15 ounces, just a hair under 1 pound, while the Canon lens weighs in at 8.5 ounces, which is nearly half the weight of the Sigma. Mounted on the M50, the Sigma combo weighs 1 pound 11 ounces, while the Canon lens combo weighs 1 pound 4 ounces. Either way, both lenses are super lightweight on the Canon M50. On the front of these lenses, the Sigma has a larger filter thread of 67 millimeters versus 55 millimeters on the Canon. All right, so this next part should be really interesting. We're going to compare the picture quality of the 16mm compared to the 11 to 22, and we're also going to see how well these lenses perform in low light. And low light performance is actually the entire reason why I picked up this 16mm lens from Sigma, because a few months ago I recorded some video while I was in Utah, and I was really disappointed with the results that I got out of the 11 to 22, shooting at blue hour early in the morning and late in the evening. So to test the relative quality and low light performance of these lenses, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the brightness of my key light here to about 50%. I'm going to drop the light behind me, this background light, to about 20. And that way we have a controlled lighting environment to be comparing these lenses against one another so that the lighting is exactly the same between the Sigma and the Canon, and we're more accurately comparing their relative quality and noise level in these low light situations. And just to make sure that we're starting comparing apples to apples, I'm going to set the Sigma lens to f5, even though it can go larger than that. That way we have 16mm f5 on both lenses for this first video. As for ISO, I have the Canon M50 set to auto. That way, it's able to make its own decision regarding what the ISO value should be in order to maintain an even exposure as we go along in this comparison. Okay, so let's look at the first set of video. On the left is the Sigma 16mm, and on the right we have the Canon 11 to 22. Now, both of these videos were shot on the Canon M50 at 1080 resolution, 1/50th of a second shutter speed, 24 frames per second, and I'm using the standard color profile on the M50 because I'm not going to be doing any color grading in post. Now, right off the bat with the Sigma at f5 with a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second, we have a automatic ISO set by the M50 of 2000. The Canon 11-22mm using the same aperture and shutter speed has an automatic ISO of 3200. So already you can see a pretty big difference between these lenses. With everything else being equal, this lens is getting in more light, which results in a lower automatic ISO, which of course means less noise in the image. If we zoom into an empty area in the corner so we can more easily see the noise, you can see that both lenses are pretty noisy at these levels. So in a bit of bad news for the Canon, unfortunately, it's already maxed out. This is as good as it gets because f5 is its maximum aperture. But the Sigma has plenty more room to go. So let's see what happens when I incrementally open up that aperture. All right, so here we go. f4.5, the auto ISO is set to 2000. f4, again, 2000. f3.5, 1600, starting to see some change here. f3.2, 1250. f2.8, 1000. f2.5, 800. f2.2, 640. f2, 500. f1.8, 400. f1.6, 320. And then finally, f1.4 for a final ISO value of 200. So the Sigma 16mm at f1.4 is capable of a super low 200 ISO in a very dimly lit environment, compared to the poor 11-22, which can't get any lower than 3200. And if we zoom back into the corner here and take a look at noise again, and then look at the Canon 11-22, and I mean, it is just super noisy at this ISO level. Both lenses have autofocus and are compatible with the M50's autofocusing system, which, as I mentioned before, when shooting in 1080 mode using dual pixel, it is fantastic. It's very fast, it's very responsive. Both lenses in my test performed very well. As far as image stabilization goes, the Canon 11-22mm has it. The Sigma 16mm does not, which I guess shouldn't be that surprising because a lot of times lens manufacturers don't include image stabilization on prime lenses that have large maximum apertures. Because when you're out and you're taking photos, you can attain higher shutter speeds using a prime lens that has a large maximum aperture because they're just able to get more light in through the lens. But I'm shooting video, not taking photos with the M50, and image stabilization is kind of a big deal to me. It really comes in handy, especially when you're shooting handheld and you're filming yourself this way and you're carrying around a camera. It can be rather disorienting for the audience to have a lot of bounce and a lot of fluidity in your shot. All right, so let's head outside and test image stabilization. On the left here is the Sigma lens with digital image stabilization in the Canon M50 turned on, and on the right, the same Sigma but without any image stabilization at all. And I think you can definitely see the difference here. The image stabilization provided by the M50 on the left really makes all the difference. In the second comparison, I have the same Sigma with digital IS turned on the left, and on the right, I have the Canon 11-22 lens, and this has only the lens image stabilization enabled. And what's interesting to me is that the lens IS doesn't seem to be contributing that much. It still looks kind of choppy like the Sigma did without any image stabilization at all. And then finally, the last comparison, the same Sigma with digital IS turned on the left, and on the right, the same Canon lens, but this time with digital image stabilization turned on. So in this example on the right, we have both IS on the lens and digital IS being provided by the M50. Okay, so from what I could tell from doing that little test by walking around with the M50 mounted on this monopod, is the fact that image stabilization on the lens doesn't appear to make quite as much of a difference as I assumed that it would. it appears that, once I had digital image stabilization turned on in the M50, it didn't really matter whether the lens had IBIS or not. The Sigma lens performed, to my eyes at least, just as well as the Canon 11-22, even though the Canon had that extra layer of stabilization provided by both the lens and the body. So if we had to crown a winner in this comparison, I guess it would go to the 11-22 just because it has more sophisticated stabilization capabilities. But the Sigma with the image stabilization turned on looks really good to my eyes and not that much different from the Canon with its 2 layers of stabilization. Another test which might prove interesting would be to head back outside and to shoot video with both lenses in broad daylight with their apertures wide open to get that nice shallow depth of field and attach a Tiffen variable neutral density filter to both lenses. All right, so on the left is the Sigma and on the right is the Canon. And this test is very surprising to me. I'm not terribly surprised by the depth of field results. I mean, the depth of field on the Sigma looks way better than the Canon. It looks nice and blurry, and it just really brings attention to the subject. Whereas the Canon, everything is just kind of in the same depth of field, and there's not much separation between the background and the subject and the foreground, and it just doesn't look as cinematic or as appealing. But what I'm really surprised by is the color. I mean, the color could not be more different. This is really weird to me because I shot both of these videos using the exact same white balance setting on the M50. I just set it to sunny just to make sure it was consistent. And I was using the same exact variable ND on both lenses. And yet the color and the quality of the color and the tonality could not be more different. The Sigma looks nice. It has just a nice tonality in the skin tone and the saturation of the blue of my shirt that I'm wearing. And it just looks so much better than the Canon 11-22, which is kind of a disaster. I mean, my skin tone is just super orange. It's splotchy. The highlight roll-off is not soft at all. It just really does not look good. So I wasn't 100% happy with that test and decided to go back and try it again, this time using a cloudy, overcast day instead of a bright, sunny day. And on the left, you have the Sigma shooting at 16mm f/5 ISO 100, and on the right is the Canon lens using the exact same settings. And I think when we're comparing apples to apples here, I think the difference between the lenses is just really not that great. Both of them perform, I think, very well in this type of light compared to the day before when I was shooting in broad daylight. And so now I'm going to mix things up a little bit and put the neutral density filter on. This is the same Tiffen variable ND that I used the day before. And this ND, like most Tiffen filters, seems to add a little bit of a yellow color cast to the footage, which is why you're seeing that color shift. On the left is the Sigma, and this time I've opened its aperture up all the way to f 1.4, and its ISO is at the lowest value of 100. Whereas on the Canon, because it can't get any larger than f5, I had to raise the ISO to ISO 400 when I attached the neutral density filter. And again, the results are pretty similar. The depth of field on the Sigma just definitely looks a lot nicer. It's more cinematic looking, it's softer. It just, from a texture perspective, it looks much nicer than the Canon shooting at f5, which I know is kind of an unfair comparison because the Canon lens just isn't capable of getting the same soft depth of field because of its maximum aperture. It's just not as great as the Sigma. But I think this will give you an idea of, where a lens like the Sigma is strongest. And that's clearly with its, aperture wide open, low ISO, so that you get a really sharp image with a nice blown out background and just superior low light capabilities. I think it looks great with the ND filter attached. All right, so in summary, I think the Sigma 16mm f1.4 for EF-M mount cameras is a fantastic investment to make, especially if you happen to own a Canon M50 like I do. This lens couldn't come at a better time for me because, to be totally honest, I had been thinking about selling the M50 and upgrading to perhaps a full frame camera, something like a EOS RP or a EOS R. But you know what? This 16mm from Sigma in a lot of ways breathes new life into this camera for me. I don't feel a pressing need to upgrade to a full frame camera like I did before because the low light performance on this is so good and the picture quality is fantastic as well. It just looks awesome compared to the results I was getting out of the 11-22, which quite honestly, I kind of had a feeling were, not quite optimal, and that hunch turned out to be right. So what thoughts do you have? Do you own this lens? Do you own one of the other lenses as part of this trio of new lenses for crop sensor cameras that Sigma has released? I would love to know your thoughts, and I would love to know more about those other two lenses that Sigma offers, because based on what I'm seeing here and the results I'm getting out of this 16mm, I would love to try those other two lenses on the M50 as well. If you have any questions, comments about the lens, about the M50, about something that I said in this video, feel free to leave one below and I'd be happy to respond. By the way, if you like the video, by all means, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to keep in touch. I'm going to be traveling to Death Valley coming up in about 3 weeks. And I'm going to be going out there and doing some landscape photography for a week. And I can't wait to give this lens a try when I'm out there. All right, so that's it. I'll see you next time.